Hello, and welcome to the Cash News Podcast. Informative conversations about all things currency and cash. We'll share insights on the issues affecting the world of cash today, like cash security, payments technology, and the cash supply chain. Your hosts, Tom Meehan and Shaun Ferrari, hope to inform industry professionals and support better cash security and management by sharing the latest information on trends, strategies, and technology. This is the Cash News Podcast. Now, here's Tom and Shaun.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cash News Podcast. Shaun, how are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you doing on this summer day in August?
Yeah, doing well. I mean, we're wrapping up, right? Like we were just actually talking about, right? The kids are getting back to school or are back to school. I think mine go back in really 2 weeks, and yours are back. So
Yeah, went back today. So the house is quieter. Get back to some semblance of normalcy. But it's been a fast summer. Hope everybody out there has enjoyed it and done a little podcast listening while they've been away, but maybe got to travel a little bit, experience some different payment trends happening around the world, in terms of real-time payments, cash use, other things. It's always fun to travel and see how different countries and economies are evolving in the payment space. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of buzz and things going on, good, bad, or indifferent, in payments, whether it be real-time payments or any of the other things that are occurring. So I know we're going to talk about where we're going to be, and we're going to keep this short. I think we say this every time, but we're really going to try to stick to it. We'll try to keep a consistent cadence, even if it's really short. But I know both of us have kind of been on the AI ride for the last, feels like forever, even though it hasn't been. I've been speaking a lot about AI in generality, like if you're doing quite a few presentations on just navigating definitions and the risks and kind of the evolution that's happening in real time. I think you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what you're hearing around fraud and real-time payments.
yeah, no, I was just we thought it would be good to touch a little on the AI discussion today, because there, as you say, there's a whole lot going on there, and we had our one of our payments events, our Global Payments Summit in Kuala Lumpur, I guess a couple months ago now, although it really feels like a couple weeks ago. And one of the main themes coming out of that, I think we may have mentioned it previously, but it was basically fraud in payment systems, particularly as we're moving more to real-time systems and just different ways of processing payments, right? Fraud is a big deal. And one of the use cases for AI seems to be a pretty effective fraud monitoring capabilities, right? Identifying trends and patterns. And again, this isn't kind of like rocket science, but there seem to be some new ways that are out there, and pretty innovative ways that some folks are applying AI to identify what's happening at not just a per transaction level, but even at like a system level, like overlaying an AI system on top of a nation's payments platform, if you will, to say, okay, things that used to be, let's identify structuring or payments that are happening over on this, in this network versus payments on that network. But if you overlay it on top of an entire system, you can actually start identifying some things that you ordinarily would miss, which sounds like it has a lot of potential to me. I'm sure there's a lot of things that are still unknown, and you have to deal with all the ethical things and biases and all that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, the potential does seem to be there. So it seems exciting.
Yeah, I mean, so for payments, and I'll, at the risk of saying, I guess not some of the newer things that we're hearing real-time payments, although I hate to say that because real-time payments isn't necessarily new. There's just some things changing. Machine learning is not new to this space. I mean, there have been risk models to identify patterns and behaviors that indicate fraud for a very long time. And I think the credit card companies, probably why you see them popping up, have done a phenomenal job, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, creating these algorithms. And the algorithms are really true definitions of what machine learning does. It looks for pattern, learns the pattern thousands of times, it sees it, and then it says, all right, I've seen that 1,000 times before, 100,000 times before, that's probably fraud, I'm going to flag it. And then the real value today is, I think, speed, right? Like, where it was always near real time, I think we're seeing a huge difference in speed, and not just adapting from new data and learning, but the evolution of fraud tactics and the ability to kind of take machine learning and some of the other AI out there that exists today, to really make it better. One thing, today you are at a point where you're addressing risk for each transaction in milliseconds. So this is as quickly as we're probably going to see it. But in real time, you're taking that same engine and saying, all right, this is a real time transaction. I need to instantly look at this and use that model. And then the question I always have, and I don't know if you talked about this, is with real time payments, is it being flagged for further review, or is it just being stopped? And then, a high risk transaction, what does a high risk transaction look like in a real time payment today versus what it looked at like before? And then what I always say to you, which I'm sure you hate when I say, is like, well, everybody defines real time payments different. So I always worry, are you talking about what I think of real, or what you and I would say are bank real time payments, or is this consumer grade? Because where do we make sure we're defining it correctly? Because in most cases, some of these things exist and have existed for some time. I guess the question is, do you incorporate device intelligent and digital behavior like you do with credit cards or online fraud today? And then do you start to say, hey, what about that biometric angle that is really starting to come up with play of, like, what if we did actually get to a pass key scenario where we're saying, I know it's Shaun and I know it's Tom because they've validated with an independent body that that's actually them doing the transaction. All of this could be beaten, but I don't know if you're hearing similar things. I unfortunately didn't go, so I missed out on it.
Yeah, and it was some initial conversations, and a lot of it was focusing on kind of the some of the, like, who is responsible for detecting the fraud, right? Is it the bank that is functioning the transaction that's responsible? Is it the payer? Is it the receiver? Bank institution? Is it the fintech that's sitting on top of it and running it through their their process, or is it even the national infrastructure? Is it the central bank or the payment provider that's responsible, or does everybody have a share in it and it's everybody working together? What does that look like? And I think people are still trying to figure that out, because your point's a good one in terms of, okay, well, what does it mean when you identify something? And, like, are you stopping the transaction? Are you slowing it down? Are you asking follow-up questions? What are you doing? And I think who's doing that monitoring has an implication to that question, right? Because if it's a national system that's doing the monitoring, chances of it slowing down and then going to a help desk and somebody calling, that's not who typically does that, right? That would be much more of a function of your bank doing it.
Yep.
In terms of their customer service saying, okay, let me reach out and figure out what's going on and problem solve it and blah, blah, blah. Fintechs probably play a role somewhere in the middle there too. I doubt the customer's not gonna, if you're running a function through, just making up a bank of Shaun, and the customer is expecting the bank of Shaun to call them, they're not going to know when fintech Tom says, hey, I identified a problem. You're like, who are you? I want to talk to my bank or whatever.
Fintech Tom and Bank of Shaun.
That's right. I'm out of creativity today. That's the best I could do.
I love it.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting story, and as I've been putting together the agenda for our upcoming London event, which is the Central Bank AI Conference at the end of September, it's digging into all these different aspects of AI and how a regulator, how a system operator, how new payment systems should or current payment systems should think about using these tools to do their job. And it's a lot of unanswered questions, because then, as much as they can help, you do have to think about the policies that and regulations around them, and the other implications when AI is biased, and it is inherently biased. So how do you correct for that? And what does that mean? So that an entire group's worth of payments aren't getting rejected or slowed down because it's an inherently riskier group, so says the model, but still legitimate. So how do you monitor those types of events both from a supervisor standpoint, so from a central bank standpoint, to say, hey, we're monitoring how you, financial institution or payment system operator, are running AI in your processes, and making sure that it is ethical and effective and everything. It's a whole different rubric of things to look at.
Yeah. I also think that when we talk about, and I'm not to get super like into the weeds, but like it's all easy when you're whiteboarding this out. But when you're talking about AI, that there's a real need for high quality, well organized data to train. And then who's governing that data? Like, so when you talk about who owns it, like who owns this risk model? Like, is it an open model? Is it, usually there's got to be a governing body, and I don't see the central banks owning it. I don't see these some of these people. There's usually going to be a fintech or a provider in the middle. And then what I always say, and I always talk about this, and this is probably where I get the most concerned, is the balance of fraud prevention versus the experience for the end user, whether it be a big bank or this, keeping that in mind. And then one of the biggest things that I talk about AI is that the bad guys are evolving just as rapidly as the good guys are. So you have this completely different landscape than you did 2 or 3 years ago. Now, machine learning and AI, I mean, I remember probably 5 years ago saying, like, there's going to be this heightened level of bad guys using AI, but now you're at this like almost unfathomable speed where if you put something in place, you can use AI to figure out what was in place. And I don't know, like, you look at JP Morgan Chase using an AI system, and I'm not 100% sure the name, but there was a release about something like Doc, large language model to analyze legal documents. Like they built that. MasterCard is pretty open about their decision intelligent platform, which is about spending patterns and likelihood of fraud. That's just kind of the build on it. I see a place where you have the bigger, either bigger providers like MasterCard, Visa, American Express, or Chase, or Discover, one of the real big players that have been doing decisioning fraud, to potentially create a whole another, hey, we know how to do this, that we can take some of the lessons learned. Now, when I say that out loud, I would argue that this is different than all that, right? You don't have consumer behaviors. You don't have some of those things. I would argue that a lot of this might be the same way we look at wire transfer fraud, and there might be a model that goes like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. This amount isn't common. But the one thing I would say more than anything is we all have to be aware of it. This is evolving in real time, and this is where I think currency research really comes into play, is having a platform to discuss it and discuss it openly. Because I would argue if you're responsible for fraud in an organization, well, the folks I work with are very transparent with their organization. It's tough when you're the vice president of fraud for financial institution to go like, hey guys, this is so new, we don't know what to do. It's tough to have that conversation. So kudos to you and the group of kind of tackling it, and creating a platform for everyone.
Yeah, no, thanks. And it is, you're right. It is not only is it uncomfortable to say we don't know what we're doing in this space yet, but it's also a competitive advantage, right? Depending who you are. Like, if you do know what you're doing, you're like, well, mine's better than yours is. And maybe the users will know that. However, I think as things all get tied together, and that's another topic at events, right? The whole interoperability, as one system needs to talk to the other system, and so forth. I think there is starting to be some semblance that, particularly in this area, the more communication, and we're all in this together type thing, has a role to play here, because you can't really do it by yourself. To your point, you need better data sets, you need more data, and you can't, maybe there's 3 or 4 players in the world, and we all kind of know who those are, that have plenty of data to probably be able to do this. But aside from that, it would be difficult.
Yeah, and I say this all the time. Like, do you want that data?
Yeah, right.
Do you want to own that data? And everybody goes, oh, well, of course you do, but I would argue that it is a very niche place to play. And if you know what you're doing and you can monetize it, it's fantastic, right? Everybody loves it. But, your point before is like, well, who's ultimately responsible? If you have a fintech or a company, maybe I shouldn't use the word fintech, that is responsible for your fraud mitigation model, generally they're taking some of that responsibility. There's usually some level of that. So this is an area that is, I think, ripe for growth, ripe for competition. Innovation breeds competition. I always say that standardization breeds competition. So hopefully we get a little further along. I still, and it's probably me, worry that there's a lot of misnomers about real-time payments in general. And, some of
Sure.
it's fear mongering, some of it is, rightfully so. But I think that plays a role in it too. I also know the bad guys are researching it. I know the bad guys are actually going out there and saying, hey, how do I take advantage of this? Because now, what we talk about it, I think, gosh, I should know this. What is it? $500,000 is the limit for the Fed now function. I forgot what it was, but it's, the instant payment. There's a limit. If you're a bad guy sitting in Romania, Nigeria, North Korea, China, any of the countries that frequent the online fraud, and you go like, hey, I can get this money in hand right now, versus my wire fraud scam that I do on a Friday morning, hoping that it'll clear before anybody realizes it and I can get that out of the account. That's the challenge. I've seen success with wire fraud issues now, where companies are able to actually get a large portion of it down because of that hold, because of that period. And it's coin flip, right? If you catch it. But with real-time payments, I think there is some risk of that. And then I go back to, for me, the biggest question is, who bears the risk?
Yep.
Who bears it? Because if it's not safe and very clear who owns it, you have a real issue. And I'll leave you with this on this topic. It's the conversation you and I had with Zelle. Zelle's not a bank, right? Like they're kind of a middleman. So when there's an issue, they're never responsible. And bad example probably, but kind of how I feel about, like, hey, I'm just the guy that makes it easy. I'm the guy that can move the money from point A to point B faster than what was done before. But anytime I've ever seen a Zelle issue, the bank goes like, not us. You're the one that sent it. And Zelle goes like, hey, I'm the guy who just moved it from point A to point B. And that's not a shot at Zelle, by the way. That's just the reality of what it is. So granted, that's consumer facing, which is a little different than bank to bank, but it's still there's going to be a line on a P&L somewhere that has to include this in it. And maybe we're just putting in our regular fraud or bad debt lines today. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. And yeah, but that's where we're hoping. I don't know. I think there's some promise, as I said, for some of these tools to identify some of the stuff, but we've got to work on it for sure. Anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah, so AI topic is out there. Come see us in London, September 25th and 26th at the Central Bank AI Conference. Talk more about that. And we've got the Digital Currency Conference earlier in that week, also in London, same place, the 23rd and 24th. So talk digital currency, AI, via our Payments Innovation and Technology Week in London. Should be a good time.
Awesome. And then I guess November, Louisiana, right? Is that where we're going?
November, yeah. America's Cash Cycle Seminar in New Orleans, first week in November. Talk about the usual cash topics. There'll be some payments topics on there too. A little bit of update on real time. We'll do some AI discussion also. But most of the agenda will be back to the good old cash circulation. How is it moving? How can it be more efficient? What's the new technology out there for that? Those types of topics as usual.
Awesome. Well, good to see you as always. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Cash News Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful. Don't forget to like and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and be sure to visit us at thecashnews.com to stay up to date with the latest on the world of cash. Thanks again for listening to the Cash News Podcast.